TIMA7312, activity 2 of our PoE, and this is pedagogical knowledge for 45 marks. This activity requires you to develop a differentiated lesson for the 3 groupings of learners that you developed as a class during Learning Unit 3. And as you will remember, we have discussed these 3 ability groupings, so we are going to use those. We need to develop a series of differentiated lessons for the following criteria. It is a grade 7 class with 3 ability groupings. The topic is problem solving, comparing 2 quantities of different kinds. So it's rate 2 quantities of different kinds. For example, kilometers per hour or meter per second, or the cost of something against its weight, like meat will be, say for instance, lamb chops are 80 Rand per kilo. So Rand per kilo. Those are rate problems. There are 3 lessons in the series, and we need to also indicate the 5 strands of mathematical proficiency of Kilpatrick and how they are developed over the series of the 3 lessons. So let's just go back again to the 3 groupings of the learners. You need to remember it's a differentiated lesson for the 3 groupings of learners. And like we said, we can group learners according to home languages and learners with ADHD, math anxiety, gifted learners, socioeconomic status. And then what we are going to do is ability groupings. So we are focusing on ability groupings. So we would have a group that still struggle. Then we have a group that is on target or on par. And then we will have a group that is the high level of skills learners, which is actually our challenge group. In some, you can call it what you want. So you can look in the guidelines for responding to learner diversity, which is a document set up by the Department of Education to look at the different namings they give the groups there. It is an Appendix A that they discuss a math lesson, and you will see that they also use ability groupings there. So please go and check there that you make sure that you know what to do in this instance. So you will sit with a group. You will group your learners according to ability for this topic, which is problem solving, comparing 2 quantities of different kinds or rate. You would group your learners in a group that still struggle a bit, a group that is okay and up to standard, and then a group who really understands and who need challenging problems. Right, so there are 3 lessons in this series. So you are going to have 1 lesson plan. So you are using your lesson plan template only once. So for all 3 lessons, you are going to use the template, and we call this a unit plan, in which you are going to show progression. In other words, from your first lesson to your second lesson to the last lesson, there should be progression. We also need to use all 5 of Kilpatrick's strands of mathematical proficiency, and those are conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, strategic competence, adaptive reasoning, productive disposition. For this, you can refer to chapter 4 of Kilpatrick, and I've also uploaded this PDF for you on your PoE folder, so everything is there together. So in your lesson, you will introduce this new concept, which is rate. And for that, you would use the strand conceptual understanding. So you would introduce the concept and make sure that your learners understand this concept. Then you will also practice this problem solving with rate, and we call this procedural fluency. And once again, when you are practicing this problem solving and doing problems related to real-life problems, meaningful, relevant problems. You are doing strategic competence, adaptive reasoning, and productive disposition. So you explain that in your lesson. So we are doing one lesson plan, which will contain the information and directions for all 3 of the lessons in the series, and this is called a unit plan. So the introduction of your lesson is your entire first introductory lesson, complete with activities. And remember, with activities, we do not necessarily mean that it has to be worksheets. It can be any learning experience where your learners are actively involved in scaffolding their knowledge. The body of the lesson is your second lesson, in which concepts are cemented, complete with activities. And then the conclusion of your lesson is your third lesson, in which you tie up the concepts, complete with activities, and a differentiated assessment. Your lesson plan will therefore be a lot longer than normal because it includes information for all 3 lessons. So if you think of your lesson plan template, you already know that the first part, sections A to G, is the generic part where you write up the different parts, the consideration of the learners, the strategies that you're using, the time, the CAP specific focus, and everything. So you are only going to use that once. And then for the introduction, you write up your first lesson in the space for the introduction. In the space of the teaching and learning phase, you write up your whole second lesson. And in the space for the conclusion section or phase of the lesson plan, you write up your whole third lesson. This is just a recap that I've actually already done. It's a differentiated lesson. So within your lesson, you are already going to differentiate. It's for grade 7s on problem solving with the topic rate. You need 3 lessons in this series. And you also need to mention Kilpatrick's strands and where they fit in. So here I've actually given you where to do what with Kilpatrick's strands. So in the introduction, you are going to introduce and you are going to use conceptual understanding to make sure that your learners have a good conceptual understanding of rate. In the body, it's the teaching and learning phase. You are going to work on this procedural fluency by giving them activities to do so that you can cement the concepts. And in your conclusion, you are going to tie up the concepts and you are going to have a differentiated assessment. And there you are using all 5 strands. And this should be within the problem solving context. So you need to explain as well how you would do the steps of problem solving by understand the problem, devise a plan, carry out the plan, look back. Those are the steps for problem solving. So that should also be included in your lesson unit plan. Use the CAPS document to make sure of what they do regards to rate. Use your prescribed textbook to inspire you with some ideas. Use the internet. Also use the guidelines for responding to diversity in the classroom, very important document. And then, of course, Kilpatrick. And then do not copy other activities from the internet just like it is. You may use it for inspiration and for ideas, but you have to give your own twist to it. So let's just look at our lesson plan template. This first part will be the same for all 3 lessons. So you're going to just fill it out once. So you only need 1 lesson plan template. This is the what you are used to fill in. The only sections that I want to just stress are sections F and G, because here you need to explain what the considerations are for the learners in your class regarding this content. And that would be how you would explain your 3 ability groupings and how you would group them according to what. And what they would do and which teaching strategies you would use for the different groupings or for the whole class, the introduction maybe, and what you would do. So you are going to explain the learning differences here, as well as how you would meet their needs for this lesson, this topic, and these learners. Then when we move on to the lesson development, the lesson steps in section H, in the introductory phase, this is your whole lesson 1. So this is going to be a long section. This row and column is going to be a lot longer and wider for this lesson, because in here you need to introduce your concept. You need to explain how you are going to engage with your learners, how they are going to engage with the content, how you are going to establish their prior knowledge, etc. What teaching strategies you are going to use, how you are going to scaffold the concepts, how the learners are going to be actively involved in the scaffolding of their knowledge, and then you also need to explain or show the activities that the 3 different groupings are going to do. You can also use some worksheets in the lesson 1 or lesson 2 or lesson 3, but please do not see this as 9 worksheets that you need to work out. It's not the case. Okay, so activities or worksheets, it's up to you. In the teaching and learning phase, this will be the whole of lesson 2. So you won't introduce the topic again because they are already familiar with the topic now. So you would go directly to teaching again and learners that are active with activities and worksheets. So in lesson 2, you can also teach and the learners should be able to do something. In the closure phase, you will here wrap it up. You will recap all the key points and you will give the link to the next lesson. Your learners will also be active in working out worksheets or doing some activities. So it's not limited to only worksheets. Remember that. Any activities is okay. Learning experiences for the 3 groups. And then it's also the assessment that you need to work out, the assessment for the 3 groups. So you can have 3 different assessments or 1 differentiated assessment. If we look at our rubric, we see that part A of this rubric is the same more or less than your lesson plans that you are used to when you do it for your PoEs. A description of the target population, lesson information and learning environment, complete and general, only once. So our time will be an hour and a half because it's 3 lessons. The CAP specific aims, also the same aims for all 3 lessons from your CAPs with links to the CAPs and clearly referenced. Objectives of the lesson, also the same for all 3 lessons, written with a measurable verb from the perspective of the learners and clear and also linked to the CAPs. Curricular integration, please people do integrate because this is worth 4 marks. If you do not give a description of the integration, you cannot earn any marks here. So for 4 marks, a description, not just name the subject, you need to describe how you would integrate that subject into this lesson. Then the learners, this part here, the learners is related to section F, where you need to give a description of how you considered the different learners in your classroom, their needs and the diversity. Discuss this with their characteristics and the implications for teaching and learning of the content of the lessons. And here you need to explain the different groupings, the different ability groupings. In the teaching strategies and differentiation, this is section G, a discussion about the suitable teaching strategy or strategies, draws on discussion about the demands of the content and considerations of learners, showing pedagogical reasoning about the best way to teach this content to these learners. Right, so that is part A. Part B is for the 3 lessons. So here for introduction, you are only going to introduce this topic in an engaging manner so that the learners know what to expect and what is expected of them, where you also establish prior knowledge and in an engaging way. This is only in lesson 1. The teaching steps will be for lesson 1, 2, and 3, where you discuss the most appropriate teaching strategy, and you also explain the steps that you are going to take, the steps that the teacher are going to do, as well as what the learners are going to do to scaffold their knowledge. So this will be in all 3 lessons, the teaching steps, as well as learner centering. So both learner and teacher lesson descriptions are included, and learners are active in the construction of their knowledge. So this will be in lesson 1, 2, and 3. Conclusion will only be in lesson 3, where you wrap up everything and you recap the key points, and you also link it to the next lesson. The worksheets or activities are for all 3 lessons, where the activities match your learning objectives, and it's also relevant and appropriate for South African children in the senior phase, which is grade 7. So I just made a correction there. It is senior phase and not intermediate phase. Senior phase for grade 7. Right, so then we add up the total for part B, and we divide it by 2 to get the mark out of 20. And then we add it to this first section, which is 25 marks. And then in total, it's 45 marks for this activity. Please remember to include a reference list at the end of your PoE. So you will save all your references. For the end of the PoE, you give one reference list. So everywhere where you have used pictures or activities that you got from the internet, please make a note of the resource. Right, so what you need to remember here is please to have only one lesson plan, and then to please make sure that you give enough detail in these phases: introductory phase, teaching and learning phase, and the closure phase, so that it is a lesson on itself. So lesson 1, an entire lesson is described here. An entire lesson is described here in the teaching and learning phase, and an entire lesson is described in the closure phase with an assessment as well. So lesson 3 is closure phase as well as the assessment. Remember, the groupings that we use are the 3 ability groupings for our lesson, which is for a grade 7 class, and the topic is problem solving, comparing 2 quantities of different kinds, which is rate. Also, note that you need to indicate where you have used the strands of mathematical proficiency in your 3 lessons.